talked about the Samuels, and we saw that the majority of Samuel focuses on not only Israelite monarchy, but specifically the life of David. David is this immensely important figure whose covenant, the Davidic covenant, sort of casts this shadow on every Israelite king moving forward. The line of David is of the utmost importance. It is through his line that Yahweh will have this perpetual relationship with his people. Well, that leads us now to Kings, First and Second Kings, which focus on the Israelite kings, and eventually, after the kingdom split, the northern kingdom of Israel, and then the southern kingdom of Judah. And this book will take us about 500 years until really the end of the kingdom. And so let's go ahead and get started now. Overview of Kings. Alrighty. So the title here, you can see the Hebrew, which is Melachim, and then it's an Aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, meaning Melachim 1, or First Kings. You can see the Greek is Basileon 3, Third Kingdom, and that is because Kings continues, at least title-wise, it's like a continuation of First and Second Samuel. And the reason it's called the Third Kingdom is, again, because Samuel, in at least the Greek title, it is titled that way because it's the beginning of the kingdom of Israel, right? As in, it has a king over it. And Kings obviously maintains that storyline. And speaking of storyline, our literary flow here, Kings continues the narrative of the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, and Samuel by focusing on the northern and southern kingdoms, both of whom are eventually sacked. They're eventually destroyed, and the people within those kingdoms, many of them, are exiled. So I don't think I can emphasize this enough, because it's I've said this in most of my lectures, is that the Pentateuch, then the Old Testament books that follow the Pentateuch, moving into the New Testament, it is one continuous story of the God, the creator of the world, Yahweh, who is in covenant with people, and he's on mission to bless the world. And so Kings just maintains this storyline that we've already been considering. Now, chronologically, Kings covers about 4 centuries. That's a long time, beginning with the reign of Solomon in 970 BC, including with the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. And so we've talked again about this with historiography. Kings can't cover literally every single thing over 4 centuries, so it's going to be selective in the events that it covers. And I think the events are most so focused on how did we end up in exile, and then also, is there still a David that's going to come? And so let's go ahead and think about this a little bit further now. And so here are just some helpful, I think, pictures for you to think about the kings. And so if you look on this picture on the left, this is a list of different kings. So first, the kings of southern Judah, and then the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom. And we'll talk a little bit about why there's different kingdoms here in a second. You can see the picture on the right side as well, just the makeup of those two nations. What was the capital? When was it destroyed? What was the economic status? Things like that. I will say this always really surprised me, is that the southern kingdom was like a more of a sort of a backwater kingdom, which is interesting because we typically associate Jerusalem and Judah because was the largest, that in terms of people, that it was maybe more economically prosperous, but that wasn't the case. It was really the northern kingdom with their 10 tribes and their capital at Samaria that really had a prosperous economy, which that always surprised me. And so I think that's helpful to know, even though Kings spends more time focusing on the southern kingdom. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on in just a little bit here. So here's a good literary flow, good way to think about this just big book here, right? So in the beginning of Kings, in chapters 1 through 8, you have this incredibly high note. King Solomon, the son of David, has built the temple. And the scenes in 1 Kings 8 are cataclysmic. They're reminiscent of Exodus 40, when the Lord descends into the tabernacle. this beautiful picture of Yahweh dwelling with his people, although he already had within the tabernacle, through this awesome, glorious temple. And this temple is going to last until 586 BC when it's destroyed by the Babylonians. But chapters 1 through 8, it's glorious, especially on the heels of the Davidic covenant. It just seems like, man, this is like as good as it's going to get, right? Where everything is just great and dandy. But just like with Samuel, that highlights the rise of David. You then have immediately after this climactic event with the building of the temple, just chaos comes. And that's what happens in 1 Kings 9 through 12. You have Solomon's fall. And in the same way, a lot of folks just focus on how good David was and how his covenant and killing Goliath or something like that. They don't really think about the end days of his life. That's similar to Solomon. Solomon was an incredibly wise man, but as we see at the end of his life, he became an incredibly foolish man. And he had a lot of wives, he had a lot of concubines, and he was incredibly wealthy, all of these things. And that's exactly what the Israelite king was not supposed to be. And so he really, in the same way that David models he becomes like the people in Judges at the end of his life, so does Solomon. They became very foolish. And then this leads us to, right around that time, the splitting of the kingdom into northern and southern kingdoms. And you can see here, Jeroboam, he leads the northern kingdom, and Rehoboam leads the southern kingdom. So that raises the question, why was the kingdom split into two? What happens? Let you think about that for a second as I drink my delicious black coffee from a local roaster here in the city. Well, in 1 Kings, what happens is Solomon's son Rehoboam takes over as king. And he is not wise, but he is a foolish, stupid man. And what he wants to do is have the people enter into incredibly hard forced labor. And the other tribes, they don't like that. They think he's being too much of a taskmaster. And so this leads to the split of Rehoboam leads the southern kingdom, and then Jeroboam leads the northern kingdom. Now, there's already going to be an issue is like Jeroboam is kind of this leader, right? But as soon as the kingdoms split, he then establishes cultic centers, that is, centers of worship at Bethel and Dan, which is a no bueno, because if you remember, David centralizes worship in Jerusalem. That's where it needs to be because that's where the temple is. And so immediately you have these rival centers, rival places of worship set up in the northern kingdom to rival Jerusalem. And so that leads us then to 1 Kings 12, verse 16, really through the end of the book. And that is this juxtaposition between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So you can see the northern kingdom, it lasts about 200 years, 930 to 722 BC. That's kind of not a long time, if you think about it, right? And what happens here is the kings do evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because of that, they end up idolatrous. And Yahweh exiles the northern kingdom to Assyria. The Assyrians go in, sack Samaria. It's not a glorious scene from an Israelite perspective. And the reason this happens, though, is because of exile. And because of idolatry. And again, this ties in with what we've already talked about, which is theological interpretation of actual events. So if you read 2 Kings 17, 7 through 9, we see, now that is the destruction of the northern kingdom. This came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God. And the sons of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God, which were not right. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. So we see here, why does Israel go into exile? You could say, well, it's because the Assyrians came and destroyed them. Fair enough. But the historian has more to say about this. And they say the actual reason is because of Israelite idolatry. They sin against the Lord, and they built themselves high places, which are basically like altars, in all their towns. And guess what? They weren't sacrificing to Yahweh. And if they were certainly sacrificing to other gods as well. So the historian says, yeah, in one sense, Assyria comes in and that's why they are exiled. But more specifically, it's because of their own sin. That's why they're exiled. And there's a similar explanation here as well for the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom lasts about 350 years, right? So a little bit better track run there. Some kings do evil, and if you recall when we were our introduction to historiography, like Manasseh is an evil king. He's awful. But some kings do right in eyes of the Lord, do right in the eyes of the Lord. But ultimately, the Lord exiles the southern kingdom to Babylon because of idolatry. They worship other gods other than Yahweh. So this is 2 Kings 21. Since Manasseh, king of Judah, also misled Judah into sin with his idols, behold, I am bringing such a disaster on Jerusalem and Judah that whoever hears about it, both of his ears will ring. I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria. And of course, Samaria was the capital of northern kingdom, the northern kingdom. So this is a picture, hey, what happened to them is going to happen to you. And the plummet of the house of Ahab, he was a king. And I will wipe Jerusalem clean just as one wipes a bowl, wiping it and turning it upside down. So we see here, and again, this is 2 Kings, ends in chapter 25, but Judah is going into exile as well because of the idolatry of their kings, which led to the idolatry of the people. So ultimately, the northern and southern kingdom are split because of the stupidity of Solomon's son Rehoboam, but these kingdoms then go into exile in a sense because, yes, those nations came in and plundered them, but more so from the perspective of the historian because of the people's sin. And it's obviously not a glorious picture. It's very sad from the Book of Kings, right? We've thought about like, so what's kind of big picture, what's going on, as well as why do these kingdoms go in exile? Well, there's a few takeaways for us to consider, and the first is this: is again Yahweh sends both kingdoms into exile because of their sin. Though some kings occasionally do right in the eyes of the Lord, such as Josiah. And what did Josiah do? He destroyed the altar, he removed the witches and household gods, and he reinstituted the Passover, right? So they go into exile because of their sin, but there are some kings who are good, like Josiah, destroys the altar, removes bad things, and then he reinstitutes the Passover, right? This is what we have in 2 Kings. Before him, that is Josiah, there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, and with all his soul, and with all his might. Sounds like David. According to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. So Josiah is kind of this model king as well, but we see those three things that he does. All right, but he's like a one-off. And we saw the southern kingdoms around for like 350 years. Not many good kings. Maybe him, maybe Jehoshaphat, maybe Hezekiah too, right? But David remains the ideal Israelite king. So this is again speaking on the life of Josiah. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked entirely in the way of his father David and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. So David remains this model king. And this makes sense because we saw this in 2 Samuel, that the big promise is that his descendant will reign. Well, the subsequent kings after David are always compared to David. Were they like him? Did they walk and do what's right in the sight of the Lord, or did they not? Josiah did, Hezekiah did, Jehoshaphat did, but most of them did not. And so that leads us into this third takeaway. Kings anticipates a future Davidic king who will do right in the eyes of the Lord and rule a righteous people. There's this great story here in 1 Kings 19. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu or Yehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Even in the midst of chaos and sin, Kings says, hey, there's going to be a future David who's going to come. Also, Yahweh will keep a people for himself. Those who will not, and you see a good picture of idolatry or what it is, bowing the knee and kissing. And the Lord says, there are some who are not going to do that. And this becomes incredibly important as we move to our next section, which is the prophetical literature. The prophets are going to pick themes like this up and say, there's going to be a David who comes, and there's going to be a people whom David is going to rule over, and they're going to be righteous people because Yahweh will ensure they are righteous. And so, Kings, it is so important. It helps us to understand the Old Testament better. There's a real reason it's in the canon. And now let's go ahead and turn to the prophetical literature, where it's going to get intense. And these prophets are prophesying during the days of these kings. And I can't wait to turn there with you now. Let's go ahead and do that.